This is BankCents, the podcast that makes sense of all things banking. If there's something you don't understand about banking or finances, you're not alone. Our industry experts are bringing you informative and enjoyable conversations that break down bank jargon and dive into hot-button financial topics. And now, BOS, a community bank located across Illinois and Missouri, presents BankCents. Here's your host, Greg Marantz.
Hello, and welcome back to BankCents, the podcast that makes sense of all things banking. I'm your host, Greg Marantz, Executive Vice President here at the Bank of Springfield. And on today's episode, I'm excited to have on Brad Leonard, Vice President of Insurance Services, to talk about our topic today, the importance of property and casualty. Brad, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
So we're really excited to have you on to talk about property and casualty insurance. But before we dive into that topic, give us a little bit of background of how long you've been at the bank, but also how long you've been working in the insurance business.
All right. So I actually started back in 2005 at the Bank of Springfield. I was with the organization for about 7 years. But I did go to school for insurance. At that time, I went to an independent agency here in town, and I worked there for about 10 years. And at that time, I decided I wanted to come back and do some more local stuff. So I talked to the bank, and we've been together for an extra 3 years now. Been a great experience, and wouldn't pick anywhere else to be.
Yeah, we're excited to have you as part of the team and bring you on board and offer another offering to our customers as well, insurance, and that brings us into property and casualty insurance, and we'll probably refer to it as P&C as we go throughout the episode of today. It's the short term of what we call it. But what exactly is property insurance, and why should somebody be worried about what it is, and what should they know? Some of the frequently asked questions.
Yeah, in the most basic form, P&C property is protecting anything that you own, anything your belongings, your house, your car, your jewelry, your equipment, whatever it may be, anything that you can't afford. If I get hit by a devastating accident or some type of a loss, I couldn't sustain that. Now, casualty, that refers to more like the liability. If you are responsible for that damage and you damage someone else's property or them physically harming them, that protects you from them going after you, your personal assets. That will help pay for that damage to those others.
Sure. So like most frequent examples are, car wrecks that you get in or whatnot. It will protect you against that. And obviously, I think most of us know if we own a house that we have to have homeowners insurance. So that's a big one there as well. But as you mentioned, there's other products as well. Just because you don't own a house or a car, there's other reasons you might need some form of property and casualty as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just basically the easiest way to think of it is, can you afford to take on that loss? Mm-hmm. If you can't, that's what insurance is for. You have workers' compensation. So if you have employees, if they get injured, you have a responsibility to cover that injury. If you are out of business, if you don't have a property to sell out of, you're going to lose income during that time period. How are you going to replace that loss of income so you continue to pay your employees, continue to pay your rent and your mortgage? More importantly, when we talk about a bank, it's a requirement. If you have a mortgage, you have to have insurance for that asset to protect your liability to that bank. So there's so many different parts of this. It could be a 3-hour podcast if we wanted to, just to talk about all the lines. But really, there's something for everything. And then you got liabilities when you talk about, just injury to others, but also cyber liability. It's a huge topic right now where everyone's under attack. You don't think it's going to happen to you, but that's probably the most likely claim that we're going to all experience. Now, can we sustain that? Sometimes we can, but the vast majority of large businesses and even individuals cannot sustain that expense.
Sure. And I think that's one thing that we've really seen a lot of as of late is the losses that occur to houses and cars and whatnot due to some of the storms and the acts of God or the weather events that have happened lately. Can you talk about some of those losses that have occurred because of some weather-related incidents, and then how has that really changed the industry over the past couple years? Not just locally to our market here in Illinois, but I mean, it happens in a lot of the other markets where there's hurricanes or other events like that.
Yeah, the entire country is this is probably I call it the Great Depression of insurance, unfortunately. It's been a 1-2 punch with increased storms. The severity has been so much greater than we've ever experienced, ever in our history. the deratios. I don't even think anyone knew what a deratio was until about 3 years ago.
I had no idea.
And it seems like every year we have a deratio. And those are sometimes in the billions of dollars. Of course, the tornadoes have increased. Hailstorms, that's probably the biggest thing affecting Illinois and Missouri and Iowa right now, is the claims on roofs have been so immense. Just on property last year, I believe the loss ratio for the industry was around 115%.
Wow.
You cannot get over that 100% and be profitable. So that's why we are seeing premiums go up. But there's also wildfires in California. A lot of major carriers are just completely getting out of California because it's not even there's not a number to pay where it's going to be affordable for them. Same thing with Florida with the hurricanes.
Sure.
They're mostly self-insuring it down there through their state program. And that's just, there's not a good number right now. So we're trying to figure this out right now. And hopefully in the next few years, we'll find some solutions. But right now it's kind of scary. And honestly, what people need to be thinking of is, hey, what am I paying right now? What can I do to alleviate that pain for me? Because a lot of times people do what's called escrow, where you pay your insurance, you don't realize it went up because of that insurance line. And that does affect your bottom line.
Sure. And I think that's a really big tip for our listeners too, is if you have not looked at your homeowners or your auto, if you don't own a house, look at your auto or whatever kind of insurance you have, and look at and talk to your agent about, hey, is this really the best deal for me right now? Because hand up right here, my premiums have gone up on my homeowners insurance and my auto. And so we've taken a close look at that and sat down and said, hey, what can we do to maybe lessen that effect? But unfortunately, I think most of our listeners can probably relate to this, that everyone's costs have gone up over the course of the past couple of years. And it's unfortunate, but it's the realistic nature of the industry at the moment. And so, but it is a good time to make sure you're monitoring those policies so that when it comes up for renewal, maybe there will be a cheaper option out there, in the next 6 months to a year. So as we've talked about on this podcast, when it comes to finances, keep an eye on that, watch it, and make sure you're monitoring that. Just because, that's your cost 1 year, it doesn't have to be your cost the next year. So it all comes back to those basics of budgeting, and you can tie it into the insurance business as well.
Yeah, and just to reiterate I said the 1-2 punch. The other punch is inflation. People don't account for the increase of everything going up. What it used to cost before COVID came to build a house, I'd say in central Illinois, it was around $175 a square foot. We're now looking at $225 to $250 a square foot. That's going to affect your premium because your replacement cost is much higher.
Sure.
And that's just a reality. The other thing that people aren't aware of is the deductibles. A lot of carriers now are not even, really notifying you too greatly that, hey, you went from $1,000 deductible to now a 2% deductible. Well, if your home is $1 million, well, guess what? You've got a $20,000 deductible. Is that going to pay for your roof? Probably not. So that's something you need to account for on that cost. That may be why the premium didn't change much, but can you even afford to pay that deductible situation?
Yeah, sure.
So you got to look at your policies with your agents on a regular basis.
Yeah, and just for our listeners out there that might not be as well versed in the insurance space as well, just for your knowledge, the deductible is that portion that you're responsible for before your insurance kicks in.
That's correct.
I think that's the simplest way I can explain it. You may be able to do it better.
No, you're exactly right. If you get in an accident, you're probably responsible for that first $500. If you have a fire in your house, if you have a $1,000 deductible, you have to pay that first $1,000. Something to account for is if you want to save some premium, talk to your agent and ask, hey, can we look at different deductible levels? And how much is that going to affect my premium? Like me, I've never had a claim, so why would I not go a little higher?
Sure.
I can budget a little better and save up just in case that happens, but that's going to save me premium.
Yep. Yeah, it's one way to save costs on the front end with hoping, obviously you don't have that risk on the back end, of course, that you do have a claim eventually. But it's something to look at if you're looking to help mitigate some costs. You kind of mentioned a couple different types of coverages that you can have. What is typically covered? Can you go over a few quick points on P&C that you look to make sure your customer has covered, and a couple options that are in that property and casualty plan?
Yeah. So
what you recommend essentially for those plans?
Well, on personal, I'll do personal and commercial. So personal, of course, when you look at home, you got to look at what the value of that home is to rebuild, not what the appraisal value is. And I know that's hard for people to understand because my house isn't anywhere near this number. But you got to understand, if there's a claim, you want to make sure the construction cost is appropriate to get that house rebuilt the way it was like. On autos, you got to make sure that, hey, can I find a vehicle if I get an accident that's going to be comparable, or can I repair it for this? Or is it even worth insuring that property? Let's say you have a 10-year-old vehicle. It may not be worth even having property coverage on it, because by the time the deductible's done, you may not have much to get from it.
Sure.
Something people always overlook is umbrellas. And what an umbrella means is the liability. So if we hit someone or we are the cause of that damage, typically you have an underlining number. Typically, I always look at a person's asset and say, hey, what's a comfortable level? What do you have that you need to protect? And I try to set the liability umbrella to what their assets are, their exposure is, to protect them. And the cost for that is so minimal.
Sure.
And then, jewelry, I see it all the time where someone's diamond ring just fell out on a trip and they don't know where it's at. That's a big expense, to replace that. But you also have your motorcycles, your boats, your ATVs. You got to know what your exposures are. And those are probably the most likely you're going to have like an accident, or theft. So be aware of that. And on the commercial side, there is so much more to cover. You've got the liability, and liability, there's so many different elements. Of course, we have to protect our customers if we damage them physically, harm their property, but also the professional side of it. So we have directors and officers. So for example, at the bank, a large organization, we have to protect our senior management and the decisions that they make.
Sure.
And if they feel a customer feels like it adversely affects them, we have to protect ourselves. That's an expensive coverage to have, but it's a necessity, and it's mostly for defense purposes. Then you have loss of income. We talked about that. What would happen if, God forbid, a tornado came through and wiped out our Wabash location?
Sure.
That would be a big expense that we would have to house other people places. And how could we recover that cost? We have to think about, what is that cost for us? How are we going to fill that gap while we are out of business? You also have big fleets of autos. Let's say you're a big contractor. There's going to be a lot of accidents you're going to run into.
Sure.
And you don't want to just keep on paying out claims here and there. So it's a good element to have, just kind of help fund that. Workers' compensation, we talked about. Of course, there's injuries. The higher risk ones are, the roofers and the contractors and the manufacturing. The banks, all we probably get are like paper cuts and, things like that.
Carpal tunnel.
Yeah. But, another one is cyber liability. A lot of people don't think about it, but it's such a huge need in our industry. Everyone has an exposure. Even if you don't think about it, we all have those phones. Yep. And they're so easily manipulated not because the phones aren't strong or our computer system's not strong. We have the best IT there is. What it is, it's the human element that makes those mistakes.
Yep.
We are the ones who click that email, want to see what's on it, gives them access. We all got to be protected from that. And most people can't sustain that loss themselves. So really just keep in mind, business insurance is there just to protect, what we can't withstand. And who wants to take that on? It's, when you look at it, it's a fraction of the cost of what the true loss would be. So it's well worth that.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for coming on today. I think you did a great job of really explaining, what in general property casualty is, not only for the individual, but for businesses as well. You really gave a good explanation on that. And it's really about protecting ourselves for the unexpected. So we don't know what's going to happen next. And I think it's really important now with the state of the industry, due to all the storms that are occurring, to review your policy, take a look at it, reach out to an agent, and just ask those additional questions. What else can I do to potentially lessen the cost or better protect myself? And I think it's a very important time to take a look at that whenever that comes up for renewal. Do you have anything else you'd like to add or pass on to our listeners?
No, you kind of just said it right there. Just, look at your policy. If you haven't spoken to your agent in, let's say, 2 years, there's a good chance that things have drastically changed that you're not aware of. And just review that. Look at it. Have a conversation with them. If you can't get a hold of them, we're always available here at BOS Insurance Agency. Our information's out there on the website, and even if you just want to get a second eyes on it, we have a link on our website that you can put in your information, and we can get you a quote within 24 hours. We'd love to talk with you and just see if we can help any of our customers out.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks again for taking the time out of your busy day to visit with us and help inform our listeners. If you have any interest in looking up, where we are at for our insurance products, go to bankwithbos.com. So, as always, thanks for listening to BankCents Podcast, the podcast that makes sense of all things banking. Until next time.
Is there something about banking that doesn't make sense to you? Submit your questions to us on Instagram Messenger or by email, bankcents@bankwithbos.com. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, comment below. We're happy to give you our 2 cents on a wide range of topics. Thank you for listening on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please leave us a 5-star rating and review so we can continue to bring you more educational content. Thank you for listening, and we hope you join us on the next episode of BankCents.